Originally from the west side of Chicago, Olatunde Osinaike is a Nigerian American poet, essayist, and software developer. He is the author of Tender-Headed, which will be released by Akashic Books on December 5th, 2023, and was selected by Camille Rankin as winner of the 2022 National Poetry Series. And I did freak out a bit when I read her preface because it's this work is nimble, a two-step on a tight wire. It felt very serendipitous.
Yeah, she's dope. So
Olatunde also wrote the limited edition chapbook Speech Therapy, which won the Atlas Review's chapbook contest in the New. His collection was also runner-up for the Cave Canem Poetry Prize and finalist for the Alice James Award and the CAAPP Book Prize. Other honors include winner of the Lucille Clifton Poetry Prize and Frontier Industry Prize, semifinalist for the 92Y Discovery Poetry Prize, an honorable mention for the Plowshares Emerging Writers Award in Poetry. His work has received fellowships and support from Poets and Writers, Hurston Wright Foundation, Kenyon Review Writers Workshop, and the Institute for the Study of Global Racial Justice at Rutgers University. He received his BS in Engineering from Vanderbilt University and his MS in Information Systems from Johns Hopkins University. And that's where we will start today. Can you tell me more about your grad school experience and how you came to write poetry?
yeah, well, first before that, thank you for having me, Hiva. It's a pleasure. I remember encountering you at Open Mouth, and you were just such a warm individual. So glad to see you're doing well. And yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, I did my engineering background from Vanderbilt and information systems from Johns Hopkins. So how did I end up really doing poetry? I think for me, it's kind of like a daisy chaining effect. So if you can think kind of not just grad school, which is information systems, I did human computer interaction. So I was like very interested, and I'm still very interested in like bias and AI. And in undergraduate, it was more semantics and like the corporate social responsibility chain. But even before that, it was like very math and science intensive Nigerian American background. So like they're not the biggest artistic folks. They're more like, hey, like be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an engineer. But for me, I think poetry kind of came in when I was like doodling. I remember in high school, I would doodle a lot because I was pretty good at classes, so I didn't necessarily need to like do as much in the classroom space. And when I was taking notes in the margins, I doodle a lot, and I think that's for me, not growing up much of a reader, not much of a writer, even like kind of making like handmade acrostics for like random words I would write in the margins. I think I didn't know the word acrostic then, but now I do. And so just like poetry kind of came in that way, thinking about the tradition of poetry generally. I think poetry is for me a way to play and a way to, kind of make a mess without being too messy. So yeah, I think like my grad school experience and my undergraduate experience is very much based in like human computer interaction, and my thesis are very based in like humane technology and is this what we mean when we say this thing, procedures, transactions. I think poetry, while having some of those things in terms of like an eye toward those things, is not that thing itself. And so I kind of like think of it as in terms of like my applied practice in a way of the things I was taking on or taking in while in those environments.
Awesome. I actually looked you up before starting this so that I could make sure that I could say your name correctly. And
Yeah.
I saw that you've done some spoken word poetry in the past. Um,
Yeah.
how did you get into
You,
that?
yeah, you found that. So yeah, I think a lot of the spoken word practice, it was my way to, I was very pretty timid as a kid, not the most outspoken or like in conversation. And so kind of carrying my doodling to something that could push my voice further. Even the word audible, like I think the word audible, I even readily associate that to like, the line scrimmage in football, that's what they call when they're trying to change the play. So I think for me, like audible is not so much like even voicing something as much as it is like allowing the change to kind of take place, or like, calling for that liberty to happen. And so like spoken word, yeah, I think like so Nate Marshall, he was one of like the founding-ish members of the Vanderbilt spoken word group, which is what I was a part of at Vanderbilt. And then Brian Berlon, there's a number of folks, Malcolm Friend, within like poetry now, and they're my comrades. They're people that I look to kind of think about what it might mean to voice your word and what are you changing. I know J.R. Mahung, they mentioned like they put it once like, how are you changing or making the horizon better with what you're voicing now? And I try to take that to heart a lot when I come to the page. And spoken word is just it's just a lovely art practice to be in because it definitely the editing process is a bit different, but you're able to think of your poetry and your word and your sound a lot. And I think for me, I guess music is a big thing. So it didn't hurt to have that as well.
Yeah, throughout the collection, I definitely noticed an attention to sound and music and audio. So
Mm-hmm.
I did wonder if maybe you had anything to say about like writing pieces with the intention of being performed.
Yeah, I can't say that it's ever split out like that intention. I definitely have that intention when I'm writing. Um, I think like I think about the poem like Make Room, I think is in the manuscript. And I wrote that almost as a way to overtly push myself to get back into writing. At the time, I think a lot of my writing was for the page, but I didn't want to, I wanted to be more intentional about how to include something that would be more breathy and jamming that would create more space. And I think even, for a number of the poems I use, say Shura because I I like how it creates room to breathe. Like it allows you to kind of take up space, which I think is essential in terms of like what you're doing with, poetry. So yeah, I definitely think like the intention is there. And I would love for people to read the poems aloud if they can and just hear how it sounds for those that can. And, poetry is a vessel to encounter that liberty at all times to me. And I appreciate like what it's done for me, that detour, whatever the exploration allows. So.
How does your work as a software developer influence your work as a poet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, I'll even be candid. Like I'm not. I had maybe a bit of a, when you're coming up and you're like, hey, like choose a career, like you're gonna go down this path, and you kind of get, um, you kind of get caught up in that path that you feel like you're maybe have maybe FOMO for like, hey, like what I could have done if I did. And so for me, I appreciate that I've been fortunate to have two passions that relate to each other. I think, to code, you need to consider. And there's lots to be said about how you're considering what you're considering. In the same way that if you wanna write, you have to debug. Like you have to look around the world around you and be able to zoom in, zoom out, and understand the functions that are happening. So I think like for me, like software development, as I mentioned earlier, like poetry is my applied practice for that. And I think you have like social media is like point, click, and get nature. There's I remember even in high school, like I remember thinking it was so funny that like technology, the base word of technology. I was a Latin Greek guy, so I took Latin Greek for 4 years. That's my language requirement. So I remember thinking it was like pretty funny that like technology's base word is like technique, which is like craft. So like you're not. For me, it was like, oh, I promise like never like relieve myself of like my artistic like side of my brain or that part of me that wants to explore. You kind of feel at times maybe a bit bottled in by technical things and the procedure, the way you should do it. It's ABCD, and so yeah. I mean, honestly, come to think about it, it's like I remember in college there was this term daisy chaining. So like I did engineering, but it was engineering science. And at Vanderbilt, that means like you can kind of study bits and pieces of each thing, each type of engineering specialty. And so at the time, I was doing electrical engineering classes, which are a lot. But I remember being so caught up by the term like daisy chaining, which is like you plug in a power source and then you link an extension cord to that power source and then keep kind of going down the line. So you're plugging in not to the initial source, but to the thing that comes after. I think about that even with poetry, like, there are after poems, there are things that you sample or you consider from the lineage and canon around you. So yeah, I think like they kind of do the same work in terms of like interrogation with rigor, and I think that's why I appreciate them both and how they influence each other. I don't think it's I think it's I guess bi-directional, not so much one directional. I think my poetry influences my software development as well. So yeah.
That is so interesting. I think that is the most unique view of poetry I've ever probably had on this channel. So I'm really glad to
Um,
have you here. What are your thoughts on AI? I know you mentioned it briefly, but I would love
yeah.
to hear more about your thoughts on AI as both a writer and as a software developer.
Yeah. So I'm me, and I am both software and poetry, and I I'll say that like I have in both hands like the element of intrigue and element of alarm. I think with the recent trend of like AI to like deploy it or like weaponize it to like dim the prospects of writers in WGA and the Writers Guild and things that have happened recently. I think of like people not even asking permission to like put other people's work in their own corpus and dictionaries for like to like learn to allow AI to learn. I think for me, I don't know. I have a lot of trepidation about AI in terms of, but not so much AI itself, more like how we're using it. I think of like Lillian Yvonne Bertram's chapbook. I think that won the diagram poetry contest recently, and I appreciate that because I understand from her previous work what she's doing, like the intention that she has behind it, and that is like I studied like predictive um, policing a bit, which is tied to information systems in grad school, and like the countermeasures and measures that you have there. I think like writers or anyone that if they're able to hold data with care and hold data with accountability, I think that's the starting point. So I don't think that anyone that's using AI to like circumvent that process. Like I think of even there was a time when I was writing um, like templates for my poems or at an earlier part of my process. And I remember being like kind of frustrated. I think they're called like I forget what they're called, but like kind of like I think Mad Libs maybe. So like kind of similar to like that. Yeah. So like the whole plug and chug idea, like you're kind of like there's a poem by Jack Gilbert, the butternut tree at Fort Juniper, I think, and he mentions like spaces for the right words to come. And I was kind of like attacked. I kind of engaging with poetry in that way, where it was like, oh, I can create the system around it without and maybe prioritizing efficiency. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it, honestly. The longer I've been in poetry, that you really achieve the light without deliberation is, I think, what ruminates in my mind. And on my heart, with regards to like how we deploy it. So I think it could be a tool, but I don't know that it is the end or, the thing to use all in all. I think you don't really treasure a test that just encourages or like, elevates like regurgitation. You treasure a test that actually like shows that you actually learned something. I think like with poetry, like there are the writers that are engaging with the real work of like understanding and engaging with the world. And I don't think that like AI can really do that. It just learns how to mimic that, and I think that there's a big difference. So yeah, that a lot of different thoughts, but yeah.
Huh. So do you have any advice for authors or writers in general with how to navigate that landscape?
I mean, I think that at present, a lot of work needs to be done on the policy front, because for someone to be able to, what I mean now that you'll have like lawyers speak and folks that, we're having to be reactive because people are making decisions on maybe on our behalf as writers. So I think if we could be more communal in terms of sharing resources. I think of like this. There's a group I'm a part of, Data for Black Lives, and it's for like software developers, but there are also artists within the organization. And so again, like data with accountability is a term that we use pretty often. I would really even encourage artists, writers, even to join the organization because it widens that understanding of what you can do to ensure that your work is not being manipulated or taken advantage of by these systems that are out there they're out there to grab anything that they can. And so as much as we can put up, as many barriers that would be a good starting point. And I think then on the flip side, for the rooms that I'm in with like developers, like making them more attuned to, again, like being more intentional and having more integrity with how they're using these systems, because it's, I work kind of like on the healthcare side. So like, like how even we label people, like how even we categorize people for a system, it's all binary. Like people are more than that binariness. So just being more, if it takes more work, that's okay. But like being more discreet and being more, again, like attentional about how we're using that data is on both sides of the aisle, I think is kind of where the work starts. So
Let's talk about Tenderheaded. You've published chapbooks in the past. Can you tell me how the process for writing, developing, and releasing a full length collection was different from the chapbook experience?
hmm, that's a good question. I think for me, I don't know that I'll have two parts. I guess like the first part is like for Tenderhead in particular, it was a very much a living checkpoint for me. Like I was a lot's happened since the start of the onset of writing the book. Like I've gotten married, I've been in accidents, I've lost jobs, I've made new friends, and so like it was kind of a charting, a logging of that process. I don't really separate the voice in the book at times with me, and I'm okay with that. I like that it's transparent in that way. In terms of like it differing from chapbooks, I think chapbooks are, at the time, well, right now, I'm more into writing within stints. By the time I was writing a lot, like in periods of time, and so they're more representative of that period. And I think for me, like the only thing that happens is like the stretch that period of time is larger, of course, and you take in more information. So similar to like as I mentioned, like I use poetry as like a test environment. I think chapbooks are, smaller projects. Tenderheaded's a larger one, trying to tackle, bigger things that come across more frequently. I think chapbooks are gorgeous. I honestly don't think of them as any less in value than a full length, which is why I have to. I would love to have more. But yeah, I think like they just differ in terms of like what your aim is. Maybe that differs between each writer. So
Absolutely. Can you tell me more about this three section arrangement? How did you decide on that? And how did you decide each section's title? Um, and just like
yeah,
more about what those titles mean to you in particular.
yeah. So for the folks that are, I guess, joining us, three sections in the book. One is tenor, which is etymologies. I'll kind of give each breakdown. To hold and continue. Tremolo, which is like to waver, to reiterate, and then forte is to be strong and be bold. And I mentioned Latin Greek, but what I didn't mention is my brother also did Latin Greek at the same high school, and we're both like kind of like the Latin Greek kids. And at the time when I started this book, he's a cinema studies major, or was a cinema studies major, so he was big into cinematography, and I was actually starting off this project with, as I kind of mentioned, a larger aim, which is more like screenplay-ish. I was looking as an opportunity to engage with him and like things that he was more passionate about. So if was able to like dive into a scene that was familiar to both of us and point out something now Easter egg that was in the background or something like that, create more conversation between the two of us. And as that time proceeded and kind of moved forward, we got into film scores. And so kind of how the book kind of plays out is I mentioned music's a lot as a prevalent theme throughout, but with film scores, it's like it comes in different sections. And so I was those terms I mentioned earlier, I think also can be readily attributed to like each of between me and I'm a oldest of three brothers. So between the three of us, like each of us kind of taking on a different attribute, different stages of our lives I've seen across the three of us. So I think we've all had periods of wavering, we've all had periods of holding on to what we maybe thought before. And I think, we've also been strong in our, what we maybe believed after. And so that's kind of how the sections came there. Yeah.
So it was really hard for me to pick a favorite in this book. Lots of flags here. But
I like
one
the
poem, sorry, what?
I like the orange tabs.
Yeah. I didn't mean to match, but it did.
Hey, no, it's a good thing.
But one poem that really, or one collection of poems that really stuck out to me were the ones entitled 12. And
Mm.
so curious to hear how that was written and developed over time.
Yeah, I had long admired long poems with their ability to like stretch like their wings and kind of like glide, if you will, or just kind of like span and like see different things. And I was like, okay, I want to write a long poem. This was around time I was writing chapbooks and stuff, and I was like failing miserably at it. Like I couldn't really like do it, but it never like meshed well. I remember around the same time I was starting to like take on sonnets. I think that was like um a period of time where I was like really into American Sonnets, my past and future assassin, and a few other collections. And I was like, hey, maybe I'll just like I'll give myself a step below. 12. I'll do like 12 lines. I'll do maybe a different like amount of words. I started thinking like, okay, maybe I can do like a box, like 12 words, 12 lines, keep it there, keep it short, and try to see what I can do. And not even focus on the longer poem, but rather just like rendering an image. And what I found is that, which I think only the first poem in the, if I remember correctly, only the first line in the first section of the 12th poem has exactly 12 words. And the first section is 12 lines. But um, it like allowed me to permission images better. I love enjambment, but I always struggle with like, does it have to be the end line? And so at the time, I also came across like Saishura, I mentioned earlier, and yeah, it just allowed me to permission the image, and I appreciated that because as I wrote and kept rewriting, each image told its own tale, and it allowed me to kind of carry on in the same way that I mentioned daisy chaining earlier. Like the last line carries to the first of the next section, and so not so much thinking about the initial source, but rather like you know where you're landing, and in that new land, is it like what is that? What feeling is that making new for you. So like yeah, I love the poem also. So I guess we'll share that there. But yeah, I kept cherishing the modifications that happened. And so, 12 means a different thing in the Black community, referencing law enforcement. But, also like 12 means form and like how could I explode that and what did that mean for me? That were a few of the things that I was thinking about while writing it. So yeah.
That's fascinating. Do you have any favorites in the collection?
Yeah. Hmm. They're all my favorites. But no, I think Serendipity, for one, like a million sunsets on bootleg. Those are two shorter love poems in the collection. I think I like that because my wife will always kind of talk about like, hey, like write more love poems. Let's see if you can do it. It's just like an interesting challenge, and I think those kind of they they did what they came to do. And I think in a different way, Make Room is a favorite. On Deep Conditioning, which was one of the first prose poems I was able to like I think render the image as I thought the poem deserved. It was one of my first ventures really into prose poetry, so I'm glad that that one made the collection as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a turn in this section where the love poems appear. I definitely noticed that there was a turn. So. I did include a question about music. You've talked about it a lot. Is there more that you want to talk about regarding music and how it influences or impacts your work?
So there's actually a camp of poems in the book I affectionately call the Lyre poems, Lyre. And of course, like lyre sounds like liar, but also like it's indicative of like your bid of a declaration. And so music in a larger sense, like it's how I use it to write. It's probably one of the few things that's like mattered I can, if I'm looking back across my life, like at all times, because I grew up in choir, both in the church and in school. I sang outside of that. I tried song my hand at songwriting for a bit. Like it's always been like there. And so, as I mentioned, the camp of poems that they all they take a lyric from a popular song by a black male at some point of the last like 10 years, and they tend to kind of interrogate the declaration that's there. I think like music is a way to see, so it's a way to decipher. And if I'm not writing, I'm singing or humming like a tune, and really kind of on repeat usually, like something that's like that's kind of threaded to what's going on in my life. And I think they're a good capsule. Music is always a capsule to see the world through, if it's current events, if it's even specific to the artists and their own histories. So I love music for that. And as you'll see, I guess with the book, it's definitely much, I think, cherished in that way.
What are you listening to right now? Just out of
Gosh, so yeah, that's a good question. Actually, Cleo Soul, who's an R&B artist from the UK, she released an album recently, and it's great. Um, I listened to a lot of recently because I like the way he splits up like rhythm and syncopation. I'm listening to a bit of Bears Den. I kind of got linked to them in college, and so I like their music. It kind of puts me in a different vibe. So I think those some of three of those artists, I guess I'll mention right now. But there's always something I'm listening to. Yeah.
awesome. I'll have to look them up.
Okay. Yeah.
Can you give our viewers a prompt based on the book?
Yeah. Ooh. A prompt. Okay. So Michael Kleber Diggs, he has his book Worldly Things, great collection. And Ladan Osman, she also has a collection, Exiles of Eden. And actually, in both the cover image of Michael Kleber Diggs's collection and Rebound Rap, which is an image that's rendered within the collection of Exiles of Eden, they both have kind of have an image of black boys in something like a semicircle, a circle, and staring up, like awaiting something to fall. Now, of course, like Rebound Rap, it's mentioning rebound, and in both images, I think Michael's also mentioned like it's like on the court, so you can imagine it has to do with hoop, but it could be hope. It could be anything that's falling toward them, something that they're expecting, and that picture in Exiles of Eden uh, captivated me so much that like I stayed on the page for a long time. And like the poem that comes after it is devotional with misheard lyrics, which again, music being a big thing for me. That inspired one of the poems in the collection, Small Devotional. So I would say a lot can be said about hope, or like what images kind of happen in the meanwhile. So I think like both the images and the poem itself, like kind of to me, they're in response to what is happening to the voice, or to the agent at the time of awaiting something else to occur. So like, you have hope while the rebound's coming down. Or, you have like maybe like your memory that you're trying to encounter, but you're encountering it wrong or mishearing the lyrics. So I think I would say like take your favorite song. I tried this before. Take your favorite song, take two lines out of that song, whether it be in the hook, the bridge, whatever, and then start a dispatch poem to maybe a hazy memory of yours, and continue the dispatch until that letter is finished, that hazy memory, if it becomes clear, if it becomes less clear. But yeah, use that as a poem that can kind of exercise your ability to do something in the meanwhile while you're waiting for that memory to return or to become more clear. So yeah.
Can you tell me more about your writing process?
Yeah, so I mentioned I'll say like before and now are different. I used to write in specific periods of time, so like a week straight, like certain times of the day. And now I think I do it more in stints. And that may be because of period of my life I'm in right now. So yeah, mostly stints, always with music. I mentioned music either playing or I've seen the correlation between if I'm playing a song on repeat and if I write that day. So I think like it just needs to have something ringing on my heart. I think that allows me to kind of flow to the poetry more naturally, and the words come. So yeah, I'd say those two things are huge elements of my process.
Do you write in the mornings, afternoons, evenings?
Ooh,
When are you best?
honestly, I'm a bit of a night owl, so I'll be up at like 12, 1, usually writing or editing. That's if I can, if the day's gone I've deserved, then I think I'll have both the time and the energy, and more important, like the heart to write at the time. So I'm usually more of a night person, which I don't know if that's many people, but that's the case for me.
You
Yeah.
also work a day job, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah. So I'm a consultant scientist, kind of deal. So yeah, that's what my days really usually spent toward. But there are times where I'll find small pockets throughout the day where if the words come, the words come. And I try not to delay when I get them, delay getting them down when it does happen. So yeah.
awesome. What are your best strategies for revision? I'm always so curious to hear how authors revise.
Yeah, so right now I'm actually standing at a standing desk. I recently, I would say, movement's a big thing for me. So I'm usually in the seated position, coding, or I'm a kind of a homebody, so I'll also be seated then, like watching, Hulu or whatever. So I think like the practice of moving, getting myself moving, I think has also helped with the words to come. And in that sense, the words that may not have arrived previously coming then. So I'm thinking like of this method I call like fourth and tempo. So like if you're struggling with you read a poem, you're struggling with it, like read it 4 times to try to tap it to a tempo. Like if it's a pen, if it's your toe, whatever. Because I think music for me is a way to rummage through, I think every poem has music. So I think the way to rummage through what you're trying to, what you're not threaded to initially, or what is not, that connection is not there. You just need some music. So you tap, and if after 4 times that's not working, I'd say walk a route that you're familiar with. So I'm a big walker, and why walking specifically is because in that same route is because you know like in poems, there's images that get too close to, perhaps. And so, in walking a route that I'm used to, I'm able to see things I didn't notice before that may have been there for weeks at a time previously. And in the same way, you come back to the poem. I think usually it helps me kind of turn out a different image, or at least kind of think about what's adjacent and what's in the peripheral a little bit better. So yeah, I call that like fourth and tempo, just like something that kind of gets you grooving.
Awesome. I will definitely try that. Moving on to the audience questions now, which were really good, like surprisingly good. Which poem didn't make the cut, but you wished it?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Good question. I think so. I'm thinking about this poem right now, and I thought about it a bit since doing final edits with the book. It published with a small press, I think is defunct now, but I like the poem because it reminds me of my capacity for honesty within poetry. And if I could have gotten manuscript, I guess that would have been nice. But I also appreciate it. Maybe then I probably would have liked it for it to be in the manuscript. But now I can see a bit of how it threads into other pieces within the manuscript because of how I've learned to reconsider. And a number of poems I think have that attachment. So whether or not it's recognized its own poem within the manuscript, I think it's called you say you're adding insult to injury. I think the press was Black Napkin Press, which was a touring Great House and a few other folks. So yeah, it's a poem that's close to my heart. And I guess if anyone wants to read it, I can send it to you. I don't mind. But yeah, that's a poem I think about.
I would love to read it for sure. Okay, and which version of yourself did you write for?
The simplest answer is the one that's vying to learn from the one before. So because the manuscript to me is a checkpoint, I don't think that like tender-headed is more encouraging, or noting the process rather than like the landing or the end. Because the process never finishes. I don't think I'm gonna be tender after pub day, tender once it hits somebody's hands. But I think it's a continuous process, and so if I'm able to learn a bit more about who I was before, when I was writing, and continue to work on those little kinks and small pockets of joy, then I'll be good. So
I think that's a great answer. Thank you so much for coming. Where can our viewers find you online?
Just my first and last name.com. Definitely boost. Go get the book if you have the chance. But yeah, at Tunde Latso, Tundelassoul. That's me on Twitter or X, whatever it's called now, Instagram, that stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Olatunde. This
Thank
was
you.
great. I learned so much.
No, thank you, Hebe. I appreciate you doing this. This podcast is one of my favorites, admittedly so. So this is just a treasure to be on. So thank you for considering me, and thanks for having me. All the lovely questions.